Hi, okay. Let's talk for a second. But first, I'm going to tell you a story. I am going to reference the Bible in this story, so just so you've been warned, we're going to talk about God for a second. But first, I have to go back to several years ago. I used to do background work on TV shows and movies and stuff. So I was working background on a Netflix show. And with all of the other background people, something started up the conversation about God, about the Bible and everything. And one of the girls that was in the group said, she brought up the story of Abraham and Isaac in the Bible, where Abraham was favored of God. He said, I'm going to multiply you, etc., etc. He finally gave him a son. This was the son that he had been waiting for forever. His wife couldn't have children. God promised him, you will have an heir. And so he blessed him with Isaac. God then told him to sacrifice his son Isaac. Abraham, as an act of faith and reliance in God, started to basically do what God asked him to. They're hiking up the mountain for him to sacrifice his one and only son. He's going to put him on a rock. He's going to stab him, basically do a burnt offering. His son is following behind him, and his son is saying, Dad, I see that we have, etc., etc. Where is the lamb? Where's the offering for the sacrifice? Short end of the story is that God, at the very last minute, as Abraham has his hand raised up with the knife to kill his one and only son in obedience to God, God tells him to stop, basically. There is a lamb that God has provided in the thicket, and that will be his sacrifice. So God, at the very last minute, saved him from having to sacrifice his son. The girl in our group said, well, I grew up in church. When I heard that story, that was it for me. I have kids. I could not imagine what type of a God would ask you to kill your child. What kind of hatred is that? And everyone else in the group kind of started going off and talking about how hateful the Bible is, how horrible Christianity is, all of these things. And I sat there and I listened to the story and I didn't say anything. And that was probably at least 4 years ago at this point, 4 or 5 years ago. To this day, I still think about it. And I wish I had said something. So I'm not a part of that conversation now. I don't have a contact or relationship with that girl now. However, I'm going to tell you now what I would have said. A lot of what is in the Bible, although a fair amount of it is literal, especially the Gospels when they're telling the story of what Jesus did when he was here. A lot of it is also symbolic and metaphorical. So as I believe that this is something that happened, God asked Abraham, who he loved, to sacrifice his son. And God stopped it. This story in the Bible is a foreshadowing of Jesus. And it is an example of a father providing his son to be sacrificed. This story represents what will happen. However, the biggest difference is that God actually did kill his one and only son. And that kind of sacrifice that this woman could never in a million years imagine giving up her child is what our Father did for us. It is not a book of hatred. It is a book of love. That God so loved the world that he gave his one and only son, so that whosoever believeth in him shall not perish but have everlasting life. And I hope that someday she realizes the true message behind that story, that God did that for her, even though she could never do it for him. And if you have preconceived notions about the Bible or what being a Christian means, and everyone around you is telling you that this is a faith of hatred in a book of hatred, I urge you to look for yourself. Read it on your own. Start searching. Stop listening to what society and culture is telling you. Do your own research. You'll never regret it.